relationship to God. Don't alienate yourself from your coworkers by making poor ethical decisions, especially when it comes to something like advertising. And I'm sure you can think of ways that can happen. Let's talk about relationships. This comes under the category of demands because it's a demand. It's a command. We are commanded to have our relationships in perspective and in the right priority. And of course, the first is our relationship to God. Matthew chapter 22, there's not a health professional, but a professional who asked Jesus a question in verse 35 of Matthew 22. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. Your relationship to God must be your highest priority in life. That's what Paul said in Philippians 3:10, that I might know him and the power of his resurrection. Okay. Get that right. Be convinced that it's an impenetrable fortress. It has to be that in our scheme of things, that nothing is going to impinge on our relationship to God. It must be unrivaled. Next, we need to talk about those that God has put us in responsibility for, our family. We must not let our relationships there go unattended to. Turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 16. Just an incredible example. 1 Corinthians 1, there's the family of Stephanas. The household of Stephanas is converted, or mentioned of their conversion. In verse 15 of 1 Corinthians 16, Paul's talking, now, brethren, you know that the household of Stephanas were the first converts in Achaia, and they have devoted themselves to the service of the saints. I urge you to be subject to such men, and to every fellow worker in labor. I rejoice at the coming of Stephanas and Fortunatus and Archaicus, because they have made up for your absence. For they refreshed my spirit as well as yours. Give recognition to such men. We don't know what kind of work Stephanas was in, but we do know that he was responsible. We do know that he took it seriously, and we do know that he used it for God's glory. Look how he refreshed the heart of the Apostle Paul. What will we give to have a chance to refresh the heart of the Apostle Paul? Certainly the way we do that and the way God has designed it is to do it through our family. That's how we're going to glorify God the most, just without a doubt. Our outreach as professionals individually cannot equal the outreach of a professional family. Just cannot. This had an effect throughout the whole region. The outreach and the dedication and devotion, you see it says there in verse 15, they devoted themselves to the service of the saints. Devotion. That comes from family discipleship. That comes from prayer partner relationships within the family. Talk about Christians under two headings. Really, we can look at Christians in two ways, and one is as disciples, and the other is as disciplers. Those that we are called to bring up and feed and nurture in the fear and admonition of the Lord. Certainly we have to select. We can't disciple everyone, but we can be the example to every disciple. But the thing I want to emphasize also, and mainly, is on the other end, the disciplers. Who is raising us up? We tend to alienate ourselves from this relationship. And certainly Christians were first called Christians were called Christians after they were called disciples. They were known as disciples first. Who is raising us up? Our pride tells us that we don't need it. Our pride tells us that we've graduated. And that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. You never graduate. Paul and Barnabas, look at them. They were intensely involved in it. The elders at Ephesus, just intensely involved with discipling one another. And to the day these men died, none of them would admit to have achieved it or to be at the top of the heap. Even though in our estimation they were. They wouldn't admit it because they always looked to Christ as the chief discipler and saw so much more to grow in. Who is raising us up? If you don't have someone, first you need to admit that you've been prideful, because evidently your actions have said you don't think you've needed it. But second, you need to immediately change it. Get with someone that you can learn from. I don't care who they are. They don't have to be in your profession. And say, I need someone to spur me on. I need someone to know what I'm going through. And it's something that I have really had to take by the horns. I've really been tempted to play that aloof role, and it's hurt me in my growth in the past. Let's talk about non-Christians. Under the heading of co-workers, in parentheses, I have friends. Our co-workers must become our friends. if we're really going to be effective with them, if we're going to have the kind of love that we're called to, they must be our friends. And work becomes, it's no longer work when you're with your friends. It's just an extension of a joyful life. And we choose whether to let them into our lives or not, to let them become our friends. And we choose whether to be a friend to them. Certainly Jesus was a friend to us, and I'm sure all of us are very difficult to relate to, but certainly he achieved it. And we must realize this is the way God's going to bless us. We need those friendships. We need the support on the job, rather than feeling like we're a little island out in the middle of a vast, raging ocean. God has put people there. Even co-workers not in the Lord can encourage you, because you're working for a common goal, okay? You're both in the same profession. Utilize that. They have a lot they can give you in support, but certainly God has given us much to give them. The next, neighbors and acquaintances. Our schedule will cry out and say, we don't have time. I'm sorry. We're just overburdened. The red flags are waving, the red lights are beeping, the sirens are blaring. Don't consider getting into any more friendships or relationships. You can't handle what you have. I'm sorry, God's Word says, in that second commandment after the first, that God is most important. Love your neighbor as yourself. Our neighbors and our acquaintances and the people we meet are our responsibility. We have to realize that. We have to do all we can. If we can't get with them, if we can't become close to them, then let's do all we can to find someone who can. Let's be responsible with every relationship God gives us. Let's not be guilty of letting anyone slip by. Let's talk a little bit about attendance. This goes back to time management. Really can't separate the two. The group here is not the group that really needs to be talked to about church attendance. It's the ones who didn't make it to the seminar. You know, all of us can probably think of one or two handfuls of individuals who really should have been here, who probably do occasionally have trouble making it to church. And probably because... You're working for a common goal, okay? You're both in the same profession. Utilize that. They have a lot they can give you in support, but certainly God has given us much to give them. The next, neighbors and acquaintances. Our schedule will cry out and say, we don't have time. I'm sorry. We're just overburdened. Anyone who can. Let's be responsible with every relationship God gives us. Let's not be guilty of letting anyone slip by. Let's talk a little bit about attendance. This goes back to time management. Really can't separate the two. The group here is not the group that really needs to be talked to about church attendance. It's the ones who didn't make it to the seminar. You know, all of us can probably think of one or two handfuls of individuals who really should have been here, who probably do occasionally have trouble making it to church. And probably because of, or at least, maybe honestly, for work problems. Principle is, be there if you possibly can. And it does boil down to a matter of personal determination. How determined are you to meet with the saints? How serious are you about getting the work of the kingdom done? You know, it just boils down to that heartfelt decision. If I can possibly be there, I will. And that says it all. That says it all. And really, our heart and commitment will largely determine what's possible. See, I don't see in the New Testament where Paul or Barnabas or any of those guys were missing services for anything, because their heart was there. That was their life. That was their soul. That was their blood. And certainly, as we grow more in the appreciation of the Lord, everything else that would even tempt us to be drawn away fades. We wouldn't even consider it. And certainly our heart and commitment will determine what's possible. We have to be really careful not to develop a first-rate commitment to a second-rate cause. And our professions, folks, is a second-rate cause. Certainly the Lord's kingdom and the Lord's church and the Great Commission is a first-rate cause. Let's don't develop a first-rate commitment to a second-rate cause. The church is doing so much more that's eternal, or all that it does is eternal, compared with our profession, which is temporal. Let's not forget that. in determining where you're going to work and what you're going to do, where you're going to work, who you're going to be associated with. Free church attendance time should be just as important to us as our salary, as our benefits, and the hours that we have to put there. Being free for services, and if it doesn't look like you're going to be able to be there, just consider going on, because it's probably not going to be the best interest of the kingdom to make a decision to stay there. You know, I think oftentimes too we look at it, I've got to be at church. I mean, I'm really expected to be there. Our focus is not as mature as it should be if we even let those thoughts run through our mind. If we look at the scriptures the way they come across in Psalms chapter 16, verse 1, let's turn there. Psalm 16:1 and Psalm 32 or 31:1. Let's get both of those. 16:1 and 31:1. 16:1 says, "Preserve me, O God, for in Thee I take refuge. I say to the Lord, Thou art my Lord. I have no good apart from Thee." Psalm chapter 31, verses 1 and 2. "In Thee, O Lord, do I seek refuge. Let me never be put to shame. In Thy righteousness deliver me. Incline Thy ear to me. Rescue me speedily. Be Thou a rock of refuge for me, a strong fortress to save me." This profession that we've chosen can consume us, as we know. It can eat us alive. It can devour us and make us its subordinate. Certainly God must be our rock, our fortress, and our refuge. And we have to see the Lord's church as an oasis in a desert. We have to see it as a place that our souls are going to be refreshed. Think of the 23rd Psalm, which you could probably quote when you're in the first grade. "Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Make me lie down in green pastures. Lead me beside the still waters. He restores my soul." And how is God designed to do that? Through the church. Through 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 11. "Encourage one another and build one another up, just as you're doing." You see, that's God's design. And if you don't take advantage of it, then you're going to hurt yourself. You're going to hurt the body, and there will be no upbuilding in love. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16. Let's read that one. That's one that often comes to my mind, that is so critical. When we do feel these burdens, who do we go to? Do we bow down to the temptation to submit and stay there longer and work harder and become even less involved in the Lord's kingdom and become just a disciple of our profession? Or do we just look to God? Verse 16 of 2 Corinthians chapter 4, "So we do not lose heart. Though our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed every day. For this slight momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison." Let the Lord renew you daily. Must. It's a must. Let's talk about some temptations. The first on the list: materialism. We must define what our weaknesses are. We've been students. We've learned to eat Spam in a can and cream corn. Oh, those don't even enter my house anymore. My wife knows that's part of my allergy. I can't handle any more of that. But we learn to make do. We learn to get by and not go to movies and athletic events, but to stay home and study and be intense in the Lord's church. We graduate from school and we feel like we graduated from that level of sacrifice. We haven't been tempted by Mercedes 380 SLs, okay? When you're a student, you're lucky to have a bike with 2 inflated tires. I had mine stolen while I was in school. I didn't even have that. The Lord felt I was relying too much on it. But anyway, what is your weakness? What really gets you thinking about material things? Is it cars? Is it boats? Is it clothes? Is it trips to kind of exotic places? You know, what really gets the movie reel in your mind spinning? You know, where you see yourself in the role there or in the commercial. You know, you're driving down the boy, I'd sure love to be in that one. And I have to watch out for cars. I know all the Mercedes-Benz. I know all of them. I know most all of their specs. And I do know how much they cost, and that's one thing that helps keep them out of my mind. They're ridiculously high. I don't think really I could ever drive one in this world. Maybe I'll have one in heaven. I hope I have 2 or 3. But you have to define what your temptation is, okay? What you're going to be susceptible to, and then you have to be on guard. You know where you're going to get the most exposure to it. You know who is going to tend to give you the most trouble with it? Maybe those who have or are where you'd like to be with those material things. Joe Hoffman's point last night, James 1:27, pure religion mentions being unstained from the world. The problem, if you're out on the ocean in a boat, the problem does not arise as long as the boat's integrity is there. Of course, if you're not just set adrift, but you're going somewhere. But the problem doesn't arise until the water starts getting into the boat. Okay? With a Christian, the world is immersed in materialism. Those of you who stayed in this hotel last night, you know what I mean. It's incredibly plush. Just, it can really make you think, wow, you know, maybe I'm missing out. Maybe I don't have things quite organized right. I should be experiencing more of this. I really feel I deserve it. All those things can rush in on us. The world is immersed in materialism. Christians must be devoid of it. When the world starts getting into the Christians, when the materialism starts leaking in, then it certainly can sink us. Materialism will literally sink us. Here's a principle. Live slightly below your means. You know, a lot of problems with health professionals and attorneys and others who start making some money after paying so much out in school tuition is, hey, I finally got some bucks, and you start going out and you live above your means. Attractive lifestyles are a trap we must avoid. Principle, when in doubt, do without. If you're just not sure, then don't do it. Don't buy it. Just don't do it. The money we make won't go to heaven, even if we make enough to cover for 10 people who don't come to Christ. The people that we spend the time in and put as a priority will make it to heaven. Okay, so let's keep that as a perspective. Another principle, we've mentioned it before, people are more important than things. People are more important than things, and money especially. Okay. Joe Hoffman said another great thing last night. I was just soaking in both he and Sam's words. Don't become addicted to the narcotic effect of materialism. And it is a drug. In the truest sense, defining a drug and defining the effects of materialism, they are synonymous. We must have nothing to do with it. Can't, because it tends to draw you to more. Don't forget to get plenty of advice in making these decisions and considering the kind of image, even if you can afford it, even if you could afford something you really want and stay below your means, is it going to give the best image? Is it going to give the best example? We do need to heed the passages in the New Testament on giving. You know, like 2 Corinthians 9, chapter 8, that God is able to give us whatever we need for any good work. That takes away any excuse. That God is able to provide it, but it's got to be a good work. Okay, and material gain is not necessarily good work. It can be very detrimental. Like counting the cost, we must have someone who can tell us how costly materialistic decisions can be. Someone who can say, brother or sister, you just have to realize that if you do make this investment or this purchase or this involvement, of how much it can cost God's kingdom with those that have a hard time with it, or those that you're encouraging to do the same by you doing it. We have to have someone who can say, it's just not a kingdom-oriented decision. We must invite those people to be in our lives. Usually they won't be there without invitation. We have to ask them. Let's talk about laziness. Certainly we're not known as lazy people. We didn't get where we are by being lazy. We got where we are by being goal-oriented and attainers and achievers, not just setting goals but achieving them. But we certainly can fall into a lot of laziness. Matthew 25:26, the Lord charges the irresponsible servant with being wicked and lazy. He was condemned for his laziness. Laziness cannot be tolerated by the Lord or his people. And we say, well, what do you mean laziness? We're going to talk about sleep in a moment. It's not that. We're talking about getting lazy in your doctrine. Okay. Saying, do I really need to have a daily quiet time? And the scriptures leave us no choice. David, Jesus, Paul, all those guys. That's doctrine in my book. It's doctrine. That's the doctrine of Christ. You have to be fed daily. You have to take up your cross daily. But that's laziness. We start to lax off a little bit. Another, do I really need to be actively involved in discipleship of the lost and the saved? Do I really need to? I mean, is it really a doctrine or is it an opinion? Believe me, the Great Commission says it's a doctrine. Here's one that's a terrible one. You know, I'm not really sure, but just maybe our professional coworkers might, just might stand a chance on the day of judgment, even though they're not Christians. That's insidious. That can seep in, and we find ourselves acting like they might stand a chance. That's doctrinal laziness. How lazy can we get to let ourselves be lulled to think that that person might just stand a chance? See, that's laziness, and that's how we have to look at it. That's not the doctrine of Christ. You know, it says the righteous will scarcely be saved. You know, then where will the impious or sinner be? We have to keep that in perspective and know that laziness can attack our perspective on things. Around the house, if you're lazy, you're not practicing New Testament hospitality. You're just not. You're just not. Romans chapter 12:13 tells us, practice hospitality. If you've ever practiced hospitality, to any degree, you know it's worked. We had a family live with us for 7 months in 1984. Had one little daughter, then they had twins. And that turned into a real three-ring circus. That made 4 children, 3 in diapers. Clem and I have a little daughter named Lorena. We had to have a single sister come live with us just to take care of the children. So that made 9. 8 was not enough. We had to have 9. So we learned being hospitable and still having people in our home, still hosting a Bible study, still having a discipleship group. Learned so much. Stephanus is a great example to us. He was devoted. He was not lazy around the house. And we tend to say Proverbs 31, that's a woman. Don't you be guilty of laziness if you're a Christian woman. Men, you can do everything that she can do in that passage. Everything. And you ought to be striving to. It'll help her to do it. And certainly we ought to take that as a challenge too. On the job, we must be acutely aware of our example. Don't give in to the temptation to lower the quality of your work simply because you pass your licensing exam. Simply because there's no one looking over your shoulder maintaining quality control. Don't get lax. That's the way to get lawsuits. It's a way to do a poor job for people. Don't become lazy on the job. Let's talk about sleep. I really want to finish on time. Don't love it. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 13, and Psalm 127, verse 2. Read them for yourself. Psalm 127, 2, Proverbs 20, verse 13. Don't love sleep. We tend to rely on it. It becomes an escape. It's a period of time that we can get away from our pressures and stress. But I tell you what, it doesn't deal with them. It does not deal with them. Staying up and praying about it, that's the way to do it. But don't love sleep. I've done it, and it sure has hurt me. And it's a false help. It won't cure anything. It only makes problems worse. Discipline is the key. If sleep is a problem, discipline is the key. Remember in school the kind of sleep pattern you had. You just ran on nuclear power, probably, in a lot of instances, especially when it came around to exams. You didn't even think about sleep. Sleep, that's ridiculous. Who's going to sleep? I mean, I can't sleep. I'm too keyed up, even if you didn't have to study. I mean, you just get that way. If you had a great example of sleep as a pattern as a student, then hold on to it. Don't change gears and hibernate. If you had a lousy pattern as a student, repent and develop a good pattern of sleep as a professional. But don't love sleep. It's just going to hurt. Let's go on. Another subject, temptation. We're going to be greatly tempted to be discouraged. That's the way the devil's going to throw cold water on us and call us to just say, I can't handle it. I'm overwhelmed. I'm overburdened. I am just plowed asunder. It's going to happen. You're going to be discouraged. Okay. Matthew 5:45 in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, God sends rain on the just and the unjust. There's going to be discouraging times. All right, but he also says he sends the sunshine to shine on the same as well. Be prepared for it. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12 and 13. Paul says, Beloved, don't be surprised at the fiery ordeal which comes upon you, to prove you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. It's going to be there, and it's going to be there to prove us. Okay, the way we handle it makes all the difference. We have to minimize its effects. 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Minimize the effects of discouragement. Look what he says. We haven't been here yet. This is awesome. For we do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, of the affliction we experienced in Asia. For we were so utterly, unbearably crushed that we despaired of life itself. Have you ever thought of that? Despairing of life itself. Why, we felt that we had received the sentence of death, but that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God, who raises the dead. I guess he might even consider that at that point they were good as dead. They were just so decimated by what they went through. He delivered us from so deadly a peril, and will deliver us. On him we have set our hope that he will deliver us again. Okay. They were discouraged. They were heartbrokenly discouraged. And what does it say? He says it was to make us rely not on ourselves but on God. That's the way you minimize the effects of discouragement, is rely on God. Maximize your encouragement from God. Look in the next verse, verse 11. You also must help us by prayer, so that many will give thanks on our behalf for the blessings granted us in answer to many prayers. You have to ask for prayers when you're discouraged. You have to ask for others to help. Certainly you have to ask God for his encouragement, but we have to admit our need. We have to say, I need someone to pray for me. Look what he says. He says, you also must help us by prayer. He says, you have to do it. We need you. You are an essential for us to get through this. In the same way, it's essential for people to help us through our discouraging times. I'm sure you've experienced it so far, and you're going to experience it even more. But maximize God's encouragement through people. Okay, 2 more references again is 1 Thessalonians 5:11, encourage one another, and Hebrews 6, verses 17 and 18, that God's hope is before us. Certainly God is there to encourage us. Last item is independence. Independence comes from our pride. Sometimes we carry our ability to be free thinkers too far and become freestylers. You know, you have to be imaginative. You have to be creative. You have to use your head. Especially if you're in marketing or sales or something like that, you have to be innovative. But sometimes we carry it too far and develop into a freestyle Christian. And that is not good. That is not good. Can't say it enough. That is not good. God cannot use freestyle Christians. You have to conform. That means be dependent. Joe said it in a great way. We must deal with our pride and inability to be taught. We tend to huff up and puff up and say, what's wrong with the way I'm doing it? It's not unifying to the body if you're being independent and solo. Keep a steady flow of advice into your life. Hope that word has come through in this little talk, advice. Let me give you some references. Proverbs is just full. Proverbs 15:22, abundance of counselors. Proverbs 19, verses 20 and 21. Proverbs 11:4. Proverbs 24:6. Keep a steady flow of advice in your life. Our lost colleagues are depending on us. They're crying out for us. They're our responsibility. They are our white-collared, white field on the harvest. And we are the laborers, like it or not. Certainly, the love of Christ compels us to love it. But realize that we are being depended on. Remember, we started off, God's perspective on our professional career is He's depending on us. Here we see that others are depending on us. God's relying on us, others are relying on us. We have to meet both. Let's face it, we don't have any pressures, demands, or temptations on us compared to what Satan is putting on those around us in our field to keep them out of God's kingdom. They're the ones who are going through the pressures, demands, and temptations. We've got it easy. We've got the Holy Spirit. We have to empathize. We have to have compassion on the kind of decisions they're faced with that certainly are going to make eternal differences. We have to feel for them. We have to feel for them. Mark Ottenwiller said it well last year, and Joe mentioned it again last night, and I'm really glad he did. I'm going to mention it again, that we have to develop the ability to cry over Jerusalem. We have to develop the ability. If we can't do it now, we have to develop it. And I mean now, to cry over the lost, over our lost colleagues, and really feel for them. To go through the barriers of pride that we know we have and really see their need. Let me close out with a little poem that I think really helps us think about these things. It's by Howard Arnold Walter. It says, I would be true, for there are those who trust me. I would be pure, for there are those who care. I would be strong, for there is much to suffer. I would be brave, for there is much to dare. Thank you very much for your attentiveness. And I really hope and pray that this seminar continues to be, as it is to me, to you, just an incredible encouragement and spurring on to do the Lord's work in our careers. Thank you very much.
I didn't get the very beginning because I started it when it wasn't at the beginning, I guess, and I rewound it and it was backwards. But I just wanted to, here we go. Just catch even just the very, very introduction, not the whole rest of it, but just the introduction.
I want to welcome you to this class. We have 50 minutes for the tape. I'm going to do all I can to get it in within that time. I'm going to have to move along. We have a handout. The top of the handout expresses the purpose of our class. That is, to inform those who are new to the professional environment of the pressures, demands, and temptations involved. Certainly it's an informative process that we're all going through, and certainly will throughout our careers. And to be prepared for the things that are going to be facing us along the way is a sign of wisdom. And certainly Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes so we wouldn't make the mistakes he did. And I believe God in the last 2.5 years has taught me a lot. I've learned a lot from others, but unfortunately I've learned from probably the best teacher, and that is experience.
Okay.